This show is produced by the Hartman Media Company. For more information and links to all our great podcasts, visit hartmanmedia.com.
Welcome to the American Monetary Association's podcast, where we explore how monetary policy impacts the real lives of real people and the action steps necessary to preserve wealth and enhance one's lifestyle.
Inflation is crazy right now. We heard Stuman last night reference, I think he said it was 6% this month or last month or whatever. And so our next speaker is going to talk about how to capitalize on a marketplace in that condition, how to capitalize off what's coming. For most people out there in seasons like 2008 to 2011, most people are losing. You guys might have been some of them. I have no shame in admitting I lost everything. I started my real estate investment business 2005 as a 21-year-old. Had no idea what I was doing, but I was in the right place at the right time. Stated income, stated asset, 100% finance loans. You guys remember that? I was buying houses every day. 2008 through 10, I lost it all. And shame on me or whatever, shame on the economy that first time. But this next time I'm excited because in the type of economy where I lost everything, this next time is going to be my career-defining moment. In whatever's coming, whatever it looks like, because there's a lot of different factors this time around than there was in 2008. But I've watched really wealthy people get exorbitantly wealthy in down times when the majority of people are losing. Who knows what I'm talking about? Raise your hands. So how many of you would like to just have a conversation around those topics of how to make money in a down economy, in inflation, and in times like we will be facing? Do you think that'd be a valuable use of our time right now, guys? Yes or no? All right, well, it is the last session of the day before we go into our evening activities, so I want you guys to give them a lot of energy because it's going to be awesome. Ladies and gentlemen, give a huge round of applause to Mr. Jason Hartman. Come on up here, bro.
Thank you. How's everybody doing? Nothing like being the last speaker of the day when everybody's tired. Yeah? Okay. So, how many of you think we are in a real estate bubble? Anybody? Not that many. Wow. I'm kind of surprised. Usually when I give this talk, and this is about the third time with this particular talk, a lot of people are worried about a bubble. In fact, that is the most common question I get from my podcast listeners, YouTube viewers, is, are we in a bubble? And if so, when will the bubble pop? So I want to explore some of that today and talk about this bubble conversation. There are kind of two parts to this presentation, and I'm trying to pack a lot of content into a very short time. So I'll breeze by some of it, but of course I'll be available at the bar and so forth. But this is kind of the reality, right? I mean, I just sold one of my properties, and you just wait another week and you'll get 20 grand more. It's absurd, right? You know, we'd like to see something a little higher priced. Well, I can show you the same house tomorrow morning, right? So pretty crazy. How many of you think the government has been highly irresponsible? Yeah, okay, more people there. All right, good. So the question is, what does this lead to? What does this government irresponsibility lead to? Do you know, and the numbers change on this, but you've probably heard these kinds of stats, that of all the dollars ever printed, ever, just last year, 20 to 35% of them were printed. Of all the dollars in existence, last year, 20 to 35%. I hear conflicting numbers on this, but it's truly amazing. Now, think about it. You know, I'm kind of a hack economist, and the study of economics is really the study of scarcity. That's what economics is. It's how to use scarce resources. And if you think about currency, I'm calling it currency rather than money, currency derives value from only two things, in my opinion. Its scarcity and its utility. So if you have more dollars or more euros or yen or pesos or whatever, chasing a limited supply of goods and services, the price of those goods and services will increase. That's the basic academic definition for inflation. And so the question is, we did that 12 years ago. During the Great Recession, we created tons of new dollars, and everybody was going out of their mind thinking, why isn't there inflation? Well, there was inflation, but there wasn't as much as a lot of people thought. Now we are finally seeing some real inflation, but the amount of inflation compared to the amount of dollars created is still very, very low. So the question is, what will the future hold? What does that mean to us? How can we profit from that? And I hope to share that with you today. Okay, so the government is in a mess. I've identified 6 ways the government could get out of its mess. What does it do to become a financially sound government again? Well, one thing it could do is default on all its promises. It could simply say, you know what, sorry, we overspent. Reagan had this great quote. He said, to say that the government spends like drunken sailors is an insult to drunken sailors, right? And it is. It's absolutely ridiculous. So the government could just default. It could just say, sorry, no Social Security. We're going to have to lay off a bunch of government workers. We're going to have austerity. Well, what happened when they tried that in Greece? Riots in the streets. And that's happened in Spain and Portugal and Italy, and it's kind of happening all over the world. Austerity measures, not very politically palatable. It could raise taxes, right? Tax the rich, eat the rich. Well, the fact is, the math is so upside down, there aren't enough taxes to raise. You could tax everybody at 100%, and there's still not enough money to solve the problem. Because remember, the problem is much bigger than the amount of debt we have or the deficit we have. The problem is also what's called the unfunded mandates, the promises the government has made into the future. And on my podcast, I've interviewed Lawrence Kutlikoff a few times. He's an economist, and he's done probably the deepest studies on this. And he says that the problem that most people call of these unfunded mandates, these unfunded entitlements, these promises, is a $60 trillion problem. Well, he says it's a $220 trillion problem that will hit over the next 10 years. So the question is, what do we do about this? It's an absolute mess. Well, we can't raise taxes. That won't solve the problem. And raising taxes simply suppresses economic activity. That's been proven over and over again. I know people still argue about it, but they're out of their mind. When you raise taxes, the money votes with its feet. It leaves. It stops producing. There's an old saying, money always goes where it's treated best. That's why people are leaving New York and California, right? Because it doesn't treat money very well. Well, the government could sell things. It could sell the ports to Dubai. Remember when that was in the news a few years ago? The BLM sells off land regularly. So, there's assets the government has it could sell. It could steal. It could use the military to invade countries, which basically is the story of history. That's not a new idea. Just study Napoleon, and that's what he did. He was like a burglar with an army, right? This is what history is militaries basically getting resources from other countries. On the good side, technological innovation, right? Biotech, energy, nanotechnology, whatever. If this is America-centric, some new great technologies, this could solve huge problems. In fact, when you think of inflation or deflation, think of it like this. It's like a war, okay, or a boxing match. So in one corner, we have bad fiscal and monetary policy. And in that corner, that causes inflation. In the other corner of the ring, we have technology. Technology is deflationary. Certainly, we've all seen this, right? My first cell phone cost $3,200. And it was dramatically worse than my $1,500 cell phone today. You all know this, right? Technology is very deflationary. The question is, in this war between bad fiscal and monetary policy and the great things about technology, who will win remains to be seen. We don't know yet. A lot of technology has certainly come into the world. It's been implemented. The last speaker alluded to that, right? When he was talking about self-driving cars and Uber and robotics and all this kind of stuff that may well lead to a universal basic income, just out of necessity. No matter what you think about that, I'm a libertarian. I have some very libertarian friends who actually are for UBI, which blew my mind for a while, but it may just be the reality. The most likely thing that'll happen, though, is inflation. This is the best business plan for governments and central banks. This morning, I think it was Cody talking about this. Yeah, it was Cody talking about it. He alluded to the idea of how governments inflate away their debts. Think about it. If you owe $1 trillion to China and the inflation rate is 10%, then suddenly you got a $100 billion discount on that debt. Because when there's inflation, basically that enriches borrowers and impoverishes lenders. And governments and central banks are the two most powerful entities the world has ever known. They have standing armies. They have nuclear missiles. They have aircraft carriers. I don't think you can bet against them. So what do? Well, what if we align our interests with them and we just basically do what they're doing? What if we follow their business plan and we think about how could that enrich us, especially as real estate investors? Because income property is the most historically proven asset class in the world. I bought my first rental property when I was 20 years old, fell in love with real estate. It's been my whole career. And my company now helps investors buy properties nationwide. We do about 500 deals a year, give or take. And we help people buy mostly single-family homes in different markets around the U.S. that make sense. So, I teach this stuff, and then I actually help people do it. That's what my company does. It provides a network of sellers for them to buy properties. And so this is the most likely outcome, inflation. In fact, it's been the business plan for decades. I mean, think about it. Ever since the Federal Reserve was created just over 100 years ago, that's been the game plan. But it became especially the game plan 50 years ago. 50 years ago, something happened, and some of you probably know what I'm talking about. I'll show you a video in a second about that. This really became the game plan. And a lot of people, sadly, are still following the old rules. Okay, so to understand inflation, we need to distinguish between nominal and real. Hey, what's that called? Okay, in 2021, it's a $5 bill. What was it called in 1970? Oh, it's still called a $5 bill. Yeah, same name. Different value, though, right? Yeah, absolutely different value. So that's nominal, in name only. The name of something is meaningless. All we care about is what it will buy. So we need to understand inflation is this insidious hidden tax. It hurts most people, but it makes real estate investors very, very wealthy if they do it right. Destroys the value of savings, stocks, bonds, even equity in real estate. So equity in real estate is actually something that you might want to avoid if you think there's a lot of inflation. I know, it sounds counterintuitive. We'll get to that in a moment. But thankfully, it destroys the value of my favorite four-letter word, debt. Destroys the value of debt because we pay the debt back in cheaper dollars. It's the most powerful method of wealth redistribution, not taxes, but inflation, most powerful method. And it redistributes wealth from lenders to borrowers and from old people to young people. So from lenders to borrowers, most of us understand. If you borrow money, you get that money in today's dollars, but you pay it back in tomorrow's dollars after inflation hit it and the money has less value. That's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Why does it redistribute wealth from old people to young people, though? The old people hopefully have assets. They have stocks, bonds, and savings, right? And the young people have debts. So the old people don't need to die and give an inheritance to the young. It simply transfers through inflation because the younger people with their debts, they're devalued. The older people with their savings and stocks and bonds also devalued. So that's the transfer. So we live in a world of free money. We literally can borrow today at negative interest rates and get paid to borrow. But it's much better than that. It's much better than that. So let's get to that. Okay, so 50 years ago, this guy changed the rules of the game. Richard Nixon in 1971, in August, it's coming right up the anniversary of this, said this interesting thing about this temporary change.
The third indispensable element in building the new prosperity is closely related to creating new jobs and halting inflation. We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world. In the past 7 years, there's been an average of one international monetary crisis every year. Now, who gains from these crises? Not the working man, not the investor, not the real producers of wealth. The gainers are the international money speculators. Because they thrive on crises, they help to create them. In recent weeks, the speculators have been waging an all-out war on the American dollar. The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world. Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
So Nixon said temporarily 50 years ago, and that's still the deal today. You know, Milton Friedman, the great economist, he used to say there is nothing so permanent as a temporary government program. I love that saying. It's great. Okay, so let's see. So let's talk about a real-life example that happened to tens of millions of people. Don't worry about this wonky spreadsheet. There's only a few numbers you have to pay attention to. I'll go over it with you. So let's go back to 1972, the year after Nixon took us off the gold standard and made the dollar fake news. The dollar just became a piece of paper at that point, not backed by any gold, okay, under the old Bretton Woods Agreement. So in 1972, the median price for a house was just over $18,000. I'll get the laser pointer out here. Just over $18,000. And if you put 20% down, you'd borrow just over $14,000. The interest rate back then was 7.37%. 7.37% makes you realize how great it is today, right? But the house was a lot cheaper. So in 1972, a dollar was worth a dollar because there was no inflation yet. So let's review this house now. Dollar's worth a dollar. The annual payments on this house are $1,211 per year or $101 per month. That's the mortgage payment. But what if you go 12 years forward? George Orwell wrote that great book. You all better read because it's happening, 1984, right? So the dollar is now worth 40 cents, and this 101 payment is now $41. So that fixed rate loan got cheaper and cheaper every year. Everybody was still writing this check for the same amount per month, but the value of the check was lower. Okay, so what? Well, maybe not. So now we get to 2001. They're paying off the mortgage. The mortgage is going to be done. The dollar's only worth 24 cents. The monthly payment is only 24 real dollars, even though the check still says 101 nominal dollars. So let's summarize what really happened here. And this really happened. It's not a theory. It happened to millions of people. Remember, they borrowed just over $14,000. They paid back over $36,000, about 3 times what they borrowed. But after inflation, they really only paid back $16,393. Okay? They still paid back more than they borrowed after inflation. But those payments were tax deductible. So after inflation took its bite out of the money and taxes gave them a benefit, and this is for an owner-occupied home, by the way, not an investment property. It's much better on a rental property for several reasons. They really only paid back $12,655. So they thought they were borrowing the money at 7.37%. After inflation, they were only borrowing at 1.06%, but after inflation and taxes, they got paid to borrow, negative 1.16%. They got paid to borrow the money. This happened to tens of millions of people. And think about it, on a rental property, I mean, this is the reason debt is my favorite 4-letter word, because I don't pay my own debts. I outsource the obligation to a tenant. You do the same thing, right? We all do that. It's a wonderful thing. Think about it. What other asset or what other company, you know, the biggest company in the world, Apple, right? Or maybe it's Amazon now, I don't know which. What other company can capture 33 to 40% of someone's income every single month? There's nothing that does that except a landlord. So every single month, the first 12 to 15 days of the month, approximately, your tenant is working for you. All of the stuff they do at their job is to help you. Send them a thank you card. Pretty good deal, okay? So you get paid to borrow the money. Awesome deal, right? That's called Inflation Induced Debt Destruction. There's way more to it, but it's pretty awesome. So you can check it out. I've got a little free mini book there you can get that explains it more on pandemic investing. Now, the second part of the presentation is this talk about valuing real estate. And the way we can value properties is by comparing them to other things. I think this is the best way to value properties. So first we need to understand there's three basic types of markets. Anywhere in the world, three types of markets. There is a linear market that is steady and profitable. My company helps people buy properties in linear markets, places like Memphis, Indianapolis, many markets in Florida, Georgia, etc. If you're looking at a chart, these are the markets that are boring. Nothing much goes on. They don't make the news. If you're looking at a chart, it just shuffles along here. It's no big deal. Little ups and downs, peaks and valleys, no big deal. But cyclical markets, the ones that get all the media attention, are like the West Coast, right? Where I grew up, LA, cyclical market for sure, where they have glorious highs and really ugly lows. They go up and down like a roller coaster. And then hybrid markets are between the two. So understand three types of markets. Most of the world is a linear market. There aren't that many cyclical markets in the world, if you think about it. So in the US, it's most of the West Coast. It's the expensive northeastern markets. It's South Florida where I live. I live in Palm Beach, cyclical market. And around the world, it's places like Dubai, Hong Kong, London, Paris, places like that, these trophy cities, all cyclical markets. Most of the world is linear, just chugs along and does its thing. So this question is a question I always ask. And my podcast listeners said it's the Jason Hartman question. I obviously didn't invent the question, right? But it's compared to what? And a friend of mine, my buddy George Gammon, he says it this way: is it cheap or is it expensive? And this is how we can know whether we're in a bubble and where we're going. Is it going to keep going up or are we going to have a crash? So I created a new index called the HCI, the Hartman Comparison Index. And I'm going to share with you just a small sample of it today because we don't have much time. A lot of it is based on something I call packaged commodities investing. And I don't really think real estate is the ultimate investment. I think commodities are the ultimate investment because commodities, unlike dollars, have intrinsic value. They are meaningful regardless of any currency. Every human on earth needs them. And if you think of your properties that you buy as a package of commodities, copper wire, glass, steel, petroleum products, concrete, lumber, obviously, that's been crazy lately. It's up, down, now it's a little down again, but way up still overall. You're investing in packaged commodities. See, all the linear markets in the world have one thing in common, and this is how you can for sure know if you're in a linear market. Is the land really cheap? When you're buying a property, you're buying two things. You're buying the house or the apartment building or whatever sitting on the land, the improvement, and then you're buying the land itself, two components. So if the land value is high, you are in a cyclical market. If the land value is low, like Memphis, where 80% of the value is the structure, the packaged commodities, that's a linear market. So linear markets don't appreciate as much, but they're far more stable and they have much better cash flow. And they tend to be landlord friendly. So if you get a bad tenant, you can get them out, right, and start getting a paying tenant. And they tend to be business friendly. So this is where money goes because that's where it's treated best. Okay, so our rich Uncle Jerome Powell has been changing the game on us, and a lot of people aren't paying close enough attention and they're not doing the right thing. So if you look at a couple of the popular indexes, and I don't have time to go into all these, but the FHFA's HPI, Home Price Index, is very popular. The Case-Shiller Index, obviously, you hear about that one all the time. This one has huge flaws. Let me just tell you one of them. The Case-Shiller Index profiles 20 markets. Guess what? Of these 20 markets, when there's there's about 400 markets in the US, MSAs, metropolitan statistical areas, well, guess what? Case-Shiller, of their 20 markets, 15 of them are cyclical. How could that be the right thing to do? You can't get the right pulse on the market when 3/4 of that index is cyclical. Doesn't work. This one is my favorite, actually, the Housing Affordability Index. I think this one is pretty darn good, but it does have a couple of flaws. One of them is certainly that it doesn't account for foreign money in a market, and it doesn't account for non-working people like rich retirees. So the Housing Affordability Index, pretty good otherwise, but it has some blind spots, okay? So let's look at my index. So let's compare the price of real estate to gold. Now, I'm not a gold bug. I do own some. I own some Bitcoin. I'm not a Bitcoin bug, but whatever. Gold has been considered money for 5,000 years. 5,000 years ago, 1 ounce of gold would buy you a toga and a pair of sandals. Today, it'll buy you a nice man's suit and a pair of shoes. It's about the same. It holds its value, right? That's what they all say, all the gold bugs. But look back to the year 2000, 21 years ago, right? If you wanted to buy the median price house, it would cost you 610 ounces of gold. Today, if you wanted to buy that same median price house, it would only cost you 186 ounces of gold. So that briefcase would be a lot lighter with its gold bars. So, compared to gold, is real estate cheap or expensive? Compared to gold, it's what? Cheap, absolutely. Okay, so what about Bitcoin? So Bitcoin didn't exist 21 years ago, but let's go 10 years ago. 773,000 Bitcoin to buy the median price house. Today, 9.6. And I don't know what Bitcoin's doing, the last few days, but it's about the same, I think. Okay? So only 9.6 Bitcoin you can buy a house. Okay, price in Bitcoin? Cheap, right? Okay. How about oil? The world runs on oil. What if you wanted to buy a house with barrels of oil? Now, here's the reason that we're talking about this. If we go 21 years back, think about it. The last 21 years, you didn't have to store your savings, your wealth in dollars, did you? You could have simply stored it in oil or Bitcoin or gold or many other things. So if you save up and you keep depositing money in your whatever store of wealth, oil, savings account, whatever, for 21 years, and you want to buy a house with cash, say you put it in oil. Well, 21 years ago, 5,500 barrels of oil to buy a house. Today, only 5,125. So it's cheap, right? A little cheaper. It's not that cheap, but it's not as dramatic as the others. Okay, what about orange juice? I mean, really, these are investments. People invest in orange juice. They do this on the commodities market. Well, 21 years ago, 182,000 pounds to buy a house. Today, 286. Priced in orange juice. Expensive. So you wouldn't want to necessarily buy it that way, would you? Okay, what about rice? Rice is the basic food for 2/3 of the planet. 2/3 of the human race survives on rice. 21 years ago, 29,000 pounds. Today, 25,000. So priced in rice, it's cheaper. Median income. How about this one? This won't be so abstract, right? Priced in median income, how many years of the median income does it take to buy a house? 4 years. Back in 2000, today, 4.8. More expensive. But this would be a huge mistake if we consider this to be the way you would value a house. Because people buy a house not on the price, they buy it based on the payment. We'll go into that in a moment. How about a different index? So, the Consumer Price Index is the most widely used measure of inflation, the CPI. You hear about it all the time. And the CPI is a lie, it's understated, it's manipulated, it's bogus, okay? They manipulate it by doing weighting, substitution, and hedonic indexing. And you can learn more about that if you're interested in, like in my book or whatever. Forbes has its own CPI for rich people. So if you're rich, your inflation rate is different than if you're just a normal person, right? In the CPI's basket of goods. In the Forbes index, which is called the Cost of Living Well index, I love it, right? In the Cost of Living Well index, 21 years ago, it would be 130 units of the index. Today, it's only 106, rounding. So in the Cost of Living Well for rich people, houses are cheaper, for sure. Okay, but it's not about the price, it's about the payment. So let's look at the monthly payment, and here's where it gets really interesting, and it says a lot about where the market's going. So if we take the median mortgage payment of $988, we adjust it for inflation, it's only $777 today. So it's cheaper by the Consumer Price Index. But wait, the Consumer Price Index is understated. It understates inflation. So if inflation is higher, that means the real value of this payment is lower. Now, there's another index. You might want to write this down because it's far more accurate than the Consumer Price Index. It's called the Chapwood Index. Chapwood Index. Just look it up. It's real easy. And what it does is it doesn't move things around. It just takes 500 items that people buy and averages them. And that's it. It doesn't have weighting, hedonics, and substitution like the government's bogus index. So here, basically, here's the mortgage payment in Bitcoin, 0.03 today, right? And here it is in dollars, but adjusted for the official inflation rate. Okay, so mortgage payment in ounces of gold, 3.6. Now it's only 0.63. So just a little more than half an ounce of gold today to make your payment, whereas 21 years ago, it took you almost 4 ounces of gold. So much, much cheaper priced in gold. Barrels of oil, your monthly payment would be 33 barrels of oil. 21 years ago, today, it's only 17 barrels of oil. Orange juice, well, remember the orange juice one. It's even cheaper in orange juice when you consider it as a payment because the interest rates are so low. 10.7, today only 9.6, but still kind of expensive, but cheaper overall. Okay, what about this one? Shares of the S&P 500. Instead of having your money in a savings account, what if you just stuck it in the S&P over the last 21 years? Well, 11 shares to make your mortgage payment 21 years ago, only 2.8 shares today. So much, much cheaper. How about average wage? 69 hours people would have to work every month to make their payment. Now they only have to work 46 hours, and I'm rounding them off, obviously. Okay, how about minimum wage? Now, most minimum wage people can't buy a house unless there's like a cool lease option deal or something like that on a cheap house. But even minimum wage people have a cheaper monthly payment today. So pretty good. There's the index, okay? There's the median home price. And here you can see it's below 100, meaning in the last 21 years, the price of the house, paying cash, is lower overall. And the payment on the house is much, much lower overall. Here's another way to look at it. The mortgage payment today is $657 cheaper. This is last year's stat, okay? $657 cheaper. So is there going to be a crash? What do you think? When? I mean, these houses have to get a lot more expensive, don't they, to have a crash? Now, obviously, there are other factors, but this is the biggest factor, comparing the asset to other things. That is the biggest factor. So how many people think there's going to be a crash, a real estate price crash, like in the next year? Nobody? Not a one? Okay, 2 years. Maybe, you don't know. I mean, what if interest rates go up a lot, right? Okay, 5 years? A lot more, yeah. That's opportunity, right? But the opportunity is really now. I mean, it's excellent. So there's a lot more on my YouTube channel. Check that out. You've got the pandemicinvesting.com book there. I just want to close with a little poem. This is a very meaningful, quick little poem, and it was written by a guy named Donald Wheel in 1977. 1977, this guy wrote this. And he was a commercial real estate broker in New York City. And I want you to check out his perspective. One of the things I'm constantly saying on my podcast is that people need to have a sense of history. They must listen to old TV shows, watch old movies, listen to old music, just to get a sense of how things used to be. It's so easy to forget that. So just quickly, here's his poem called The Reluctant Investor's Lament. I hesitate to make a list of all the countless deals I've missed. Bonanzas that were in my grip, I watched them through my fingers slip. The windfalls which I should have bought were lost because I overthought. I thought of this, I thought of that, I could have sworn I smelled a rat. And well, I thought things over twice, another grabbed them at the price. It seems I always hesitate, then make up my mind when it's much too late. A very cautious man am I, and that is why I never buy. When Tucson was cheap desert land, I could have had a heap of sand. When Phoenix was the place to buy, I thought the climate was much too dry. Invest in Dallas, that's the spot, but my sixth sense warned me I should not, and that is why I never buy. How Nassau, how Suffolk grew, North Jersey, Staten Island too, when others called those sprawling farms and welcomed deals with open arms, a corner here, 10 acres there, compounding values year by year, I chose to think, and as I thought, they bought the deals I should have bought. The golden chances I had then are lost and will not come again. Today, I cannot be enticed, for in 1977, everything is so overpriced. The deals of yesteryear are dead, the market's soft, and so's my head. At times a teardrop drowns my eye for the deals I had but did not buy. And now life's saddest words I pen, if only I'd invested back then. Thanks, everybody. Happy investing.
Thank you so much for listening. Please be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any episodes. Be sure to check out the show's specific website and our general website, hartmanmedia.com, for appropriate disclaimers and terms of service. Remember that guest opinions are their own, and if you require specific legal or tax advice or advice in any other specialized area, please consult an appropriate professional. And we also very much appreciate you reviewing the show. Please go to iTunes or Stitcher Radio or whatever platform you're using and write a review for the show. We would very much appreciate that. And be sure to make it official and subscribe so you do not miss any episodes. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.